Alright, so this time what we're going to do is take a look at doing some actual editing work on objects themselves. To begin with, we need an actual object. Well, let's begin with the most basic one, a box. So I'll just draw it out the way it is. I'll go into my modifiers, and for the moment I'm just going to make this real easy and set this to 50 by 50 by 50. Now, do note I have edged faces turned on, which is going to change things for this next step. So right now, I have length, width, and height segments. These are referring to how the object is split up on each of the different faces. So if I change length segments from a 1 to a 3 and hit enter, I now have 1, 2, 3 segments. And you'll see that it goes all the way around the object. Well, if I do this in the other two categories, it'll continue to split it up evenly among all the sides. Well, right now, I essentially have created myself, separated out, the equivalent of roughly a Rubik's Cube. And that's fine, but there's plenty more we can actually do with this, because as it is, this isn't going to do a whole lot for the object. Now, while we could use some of these basic modifiers, and depending on which ones we use, having more polygons like this will help change things. For instance, if we were going to use a bend modifier, it would make each of these segments on the backside here limited in terms of it can only bend between these different segments. So, as you would see down here, where these segments are closer together, it actually looks more circular compared to this back edge, where it will seem much more angular. And that's because it's splitting itself and bending and changing depending on these polygon settings. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the bend for now and go back to my basic box. That said, if I gave myself crazy amounts of segments and went back to bend, I would have a much smoother and overall better curve all the way until I would end up with more or less a cylindrical shape. But for what we're going to do, we don't need anywhere near this many segments. So I'm going to go ahead and set them back to 3, 3, 3, just so I have a few to work with. Well, there's two main ways that we can get into what we call Edit Poly. Well, Edit Poly, we can first right-click, come down to Convert To, and choose Editable Poly. Now, there's also Edit Mesh, Patch, and NURBS. We're going to just focus on Poly for this. So when I choose it, it's going to take everything there is about this object and convert it into an editable poly. Now, if I had a list of modifiers or changes I've made and I wanted to keep them all here, because when you right-click and convert to through this method, it reduces everything you've done into this individual modifier. But I could also just hit the drop down, come down to Edit Poly here, click this, and I would add it on, just like any other modifier, into my stack of different options. So let's go ahead and see what all we can actually do with the Edit Poly modifier. Well, first we have the mode. For this, we're not going to worry about anything here, so I'm going to just collapse this rollout. Next up, I have selection. Well, selection gives me these 5 options. The first one being vertex, and when I choose it, you'll see that these little dots show up on the object. These little dots are what we call vertexes. They indicate all the different points among a line from where it either transitions into a new line, or if it's just in the middle, to help break it up with a midpoint. Regardless, we can choose any of these, and with it being selected, we can come up here and grab something like the move command and actually move this vertex around. and try to shape it into whatever it is we want to accomplish. Alright, next up we have edge, which is similar to vertex, but it lets us choose an entire edge as opposed to a single point. And we're not limited to just moving. We can also scale this and rotate it. Alright. Next up we have border, which we won't actually see on this object because we don't have a border to select. But we'll come back to that and take a look at it here in just a moment. After that we have polygon, which lets us choose one polygon at a time on the object. And once again, we can move, deform, change, push, pull, scale, rotate, whatever it is we wish to do with this object at the time. Lastly, we have element, which essentially just selects the entire thing. Now, this has plenty of uses, but for the moment, we won't see it actually used until we start combining different objects into different kinds of groups. So for now, the main ones we have to worry about is vertex, edge, and polygon, which in many cases will be the only ones you use for most general modeling. So let's see what else we can do. Well, I'm going to just choose polygon, and I'm going to just choose any single one. To just keep things easier and so I don't accidentally do something, I'm going to come back and choose select object up here, or press the letter Q on the keyboard, just so I grab the polygons and don't do something I don't want to do. So with this one polygon selected, I have a few things I can do. Well, first off, I have some check boxes here. We're going to ignore this for now. However, keep in mind the ignore back facing is if I try to grab things with a selection like this. If I turn my object, you'll see I grab everything behind that bounding box. But if I turn it on and I go to grab things, I will only grab the polygons I can see in my viewport. So, with this one selected, I now have shrink and grow. Well, I can't shrink any more than the one, but I can grow. And in doing so, it will select every polygon that is touching the ones you currently have selected. So if I start with this polygon, the four that it's going to select will be this one, this one, this one, and this one. Now, there can be some issues where it will select ones that have shared vertexes also, so be careful if that's something you do or do not want to do. If that happens, we can hold Alt on the keyboard and then choose the polygons we don't want and unselect them. Otherwise, we can continue to shrink until there's nothing, or we can continue to grow until it will eventually take over the entire object. Okay, so next up we're moving down into this group here, the Edit Poly group. So these are a lot of the more basic and standard modifiers that are kind of just used very early on until you get used to working over here with the actual edit geometry, which is far more in-depth and complicated by comparison. But for the moment, let's go ahead and take a look at the Edit Poly tools. So first off, with the polygon selected here, I'm going to choose any one of these faces. So I'm actually going to come here to this relatively untouched side of the object. I'm going to choose this polygon here in the middle. Well, the first one on here, Insert Vertex, kind of does exactly what you would think, but I'm going to ignore that for now, and we're going to just click on here for Extrude. You will also notice there's these little boxes next to it where we use the command but this gives us a pop-up for much more controlled usage. But I'll just begin with the basic extrude here. So I choose it, and as I move my mouse over, I can select the polygon here, click and drag up to extend it out, or I can click and drag downwards to push it in. I'm going to go ahead and pull it out for the moment, and as you can see, it kept that same shape and it pulled it out of the object, creating these new polygons on all the different sides. Well, you'll see that I can do this multiple times and on multiple different polygons. And it gives me this interesting chain of creation that I could continue to work with if I so chose. Similarly, we have bevel, which allows us to choose a face, and it seems like it extrudes, but as soon as we let go from this after choosing our distance, it wants to know how far in we want to collapse it or how far out we want to spread this polygon. Okay, pretty good. Now, bridge we won't really be able to use with polygons too easily, but just to kind of show, it allows us to choose two faces, and it's going to try to connect them. This is difficult to use with polygons unless you have very specific setups, but as you see, it simply connects the two faces together. I'll undo that. So, easy things we can do is say connect a face like this to a face like this. So there's no issues of them colliding with each other, but it easily connects them to each other. Alright, we're going to skip outline for now, and next up, with a polygon selected, or ahead of time, I'll do it that way. I'll go Inset, I'm going to choose a polygon. This, when we get done clicking and dragging and choosing the size, you will see it simply insets a new polygon inside of the previous one. Neat. So, these are all the main basic tools. While there's still more in here, these are the ones that you will use most often when starting out. Okay, so from here, the other tools are going to take us further into things we aren't going to focus on for now. Material IDs let us set this polygon to a certain number index. We can link different materials in our material editor to link with different ID numbers just to help us choose which faces want to be shown with which displays. But for now, we don't need to worry about that at all. Edit Geometry is very strong tools, but without knowing much more about it with in-depth work, they won't necessarily make a lot of sense or be easy to use starting off. So I have this object. Well, I don't need it at all, so I'm simply going to uncheck first whatever I have selected, choose the object, and then get rid of it. Because instead, I'm going to go ahead and grab this, a cylinder, just so we can see a few of these other tools used far easier. Now, with the object, we have the height segments, which, similar to what we did with the box by splitting it into multiple segments, we can do the same thing here. We can increase the number of sides to change how smooth we want it to be. And then we have cap segments. Cap segments can be difficult to work with, but it allows us to add more segments on the top. For this example, I'm going to leave it at a 1. So, let's go ahead, right click, convert to, edit poly. So, we took a look through doing a lot of different things. Well, let's see some of the other tools in action. First off, I'm going to choose Polygon. I'm going to choose this top face, and on my keyboard, I'm going to go ahead and hit Delete. And you'll see that it completely removes that polygon. Well, we can realistically do it with any other polygons we want to select. But this isn't really going to help us with what we want to do for now, so I'm going to undo that. So there's a few other selection methods and tools we can use to help us through this. First off, I'm going to pick Edge. Well, I'm going to pick this one right here, this line. And similar, I could choose to shrink or grow it to try to grab more and more things around it. But with the one there, I could also ring or loop. Ring is going to go around and select every similar created edge around this object. Loop is going to try to do it, but following the edge that it has selected, so from the top to the bottom of the next one. We also can just simply double click on an edge to try to select everything about it. Okay. Similar, with a polygon selected, we can hold Shift and click a adjoining polygonal face like this one to select all of them around there, just as I could select one here and try growing it out, or choose one further away and go through to try to add them to each other. Be careful, if you double click just wrong, you can end up selecting the entire object. But with this, now we can actually choose border, because this top edge here that's completely open is a border. So I can choose that edge, and I now have a new option down here called Cap. So I'll choose Cap, and it places a new polygon on that edge. You will also notice we now have a few other options through here based on what kind of edit tool we have selected, though things like Edit Geometry do stay there just as they are. But with this new thing selected, I can do as simple as move that border up, which I'm going to do just so we can take a look at the next tools. Well, we saw Cap, Extrude, same as before, but I can choose something like Chamfer, which is going to let me take this edge, split it up, and try to do a few things with it. Though with border, this may no longer work very well for you, because once we capped it, it doesn't have a border anymore. So we'd want to switch over to the edge. Now, do note that some of these tools, like Loop and Ring and all of that, just based on recreating, may have some difficulties being used. So Ring, that used to go all the way around, doesn't work, nor does Loop. So this allows us to have to change how we want to select things. And this is where that back facing comes in. If I'm in Edge, I can choose all of these and it will select every one of those edges. But now that I selected them, I can look at this from the side, hold Alt, and deselect all the polygons, lines, vertexes, whatever it is I have associated with this. So now I'm left with just this selection. And with that, I can still use chamfer over here. So I can do that, and I can break it down and start creating these new edges along with the amounts for them to make these little cuts and grooves into it. Now, this can be done in many different ways, and there's many other ways to get to some of these tools, but for now, those are just the big ones. Next up, I can choose something like Polygon, and I'm going to choose this. Well, there's one other trick we can do. If you hold Shift and click a different one of these, you can choose different polygons, edges, or anything else that you have selected and move to a new selection type without having to reselect. This can be a very useful and easy way to swap between these different tools so you can have the best selection method according to what it is you're trying to do. Okay. So as far as selections go, we have all of that. The other one that's kind of in the middle of these two main tools we've been using is called Soft Select. So I'll open that up and you'll see that it's over here for me now. First off, I'm going to choose Use Soft Select with Polygon Selection Type. I'm going to choose the top. And you'll note that this barrel-like object now kind of has this rainbowy pattern on it. Well, this rainbow pattern is based off of distances and fall off. What soft selection does is allows you to more gently and evenly try to push and pull things. So while before I was able to just use the move tool to grab this and move things around, I now can stretch out everything that's in this fall off area and move it all at once. So if I grab an individual polygon, I can stretch and deform the entire shape whichever direction I want to move it according to this fall off. This gives me the ability to change some numbers in here. So I can choose if I want less or more fall off. I can choose how much I want to change great control to little control among that area. So if I make it a pinch like this, I will deform a heavy amount there, but it will quickly fall off. Okay. Now, we have the ability to go through and change lots of different little attributes about it, but we won't go that far into things for now. But just keep in mind that this is a good way to kind of evenly deform or change an object as you want to do it, because you'll note that every little change you make when you let go is going to reselect it based on your new position and alignments. So this is our basic overview off of Edit Poly. So that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.